This episode is brought to you by Gershon Dancing Bear Yabusele. We are not pro players, but unlike Mad Dog, we are pro player.
PodSham Pod.
Max, welcome to episode 2 of the PodSham Pod. We got one thing right. The Warriors are playing the Grizzlies. 2 games in, 1 apiece. Ja's leading the playoffs in points. Where are you at on this one?
Yeah, good to be back. First of all, think we'll even have some podcast music this time, so we're really making it official now. But yeah, I mean, something I've noticed just sort of over the years in my own life, rooting for outcomes in playoff series, is it seems like, particularly in the playoffs where you have 2 good teams going against each other, every fan base can make an argument for themselves after a game that they won or lost, being like, oh, I can't believe we still won even though this happened, or we lost, but these 4 bad things happened. And like, it's a good sign that we were able to be competitive with all those things happening. So having said that, it can go both ways in this Warriors-Grizzlies game. If you're the Warriors, you lost, even though Gary Payton got knocked out early in the game and sort of an emotional blow, even though it was a road game with a crazy Memphis crowd. It was close, even though Ja had 47. It was close, even though you shot 7 of 38 from 3, and Clay had a really rough game for the second game in a row. By the same token, if you're the Grizzlies, you could say, we won even though Dylan Brooks was ejected, and we won even though Jaren Jackson had a bad shooting game and no one really showed up besides Ja and Zaire Williams. So it can go both ways. I think in this game, I would probably lead more towards the Warriors argument. I think they had a lot of stuff going against them in this game. But I mean, the headline obviously has to be that Ja was spectacular, and was the best player on the floor last night, and probably to this point in the series has been the best player in the series.
The Grizzlies, uncharacteristically, letting it fly from 3 2 games in. They've taken 85 threes in 2 games, 42 and a half per night, after shooting about 33 a game during the regular season. Everyone except Ja is kind of letting it fly. Ja is mainly operating within the arc. And especially after Payton left yesterday's game, it became abundantly clear that the Warriors just don't have another guy that he even remotely respects. And I'm not here claiming that Ja respects Gary Payton, but Poole was looking in the wrong direction. Steph just doesn't have the quick twitch muscles to stay in front. Clay still kind of looking a little stiff. He might have been the guy they put on a player of Ja's caliber a few years ago. Doesn't look like he's up to that challenge now. If you're the Warriors, what's your Ja plan going into game 3?
Well, I think a big part of the Ja plan is you have to make more shots, because that will take away a lot of their transition opportunities. Because in transition, they just have no hope of stopping him, really. In the half court, I mean, the primary defender on him is probably going to be Wiggins. A lot of analysts have highlighted the pre-switching that the Warriors have done, where they'll try to, if the Memphis is trying to bring Poole up for a screen on Ja, they'll pre-switch so that Clay is onto Poole's man. So it ends up being Clay who switched on to Ja, which is slightly preferable, I suppose, to Poole being switched on to him. But they are probably going to have to start doubling him more, trapping him more, because they can't just let him get into the paint with impunity at this point. I think he scored 15 straight points in the fourth quarter, which is, I mean, it's not quite LeBron level stuff, but you don't see that very often, particularly in playoff games. So probably more trapping, probably more doubling, trying to fight through screens more, so you avoid bad mismatches going on to him. It would be a real lift if they could get Iguodala back for the next game, because even in his semi-fossilized state, you'd think his physicality and his just experience, he might be able to mess with Ja's head a little bit and play angles well on defense. But it's going to have to be a team effort. And honestly, they might, I mean, it's the old sort of tension between, do you let a superstar just kind of get theirs and try to take away everyone else, or do you try to force them to beat the double team and make passes to open shooters who, to this point for Memphis, no one's really been that hot from downtown besides Jaren Jackson in game 1. So I think a big part of it for the Warriors is going to be getting their offense better. Honestly, I think a lot of times their offense is their best defense, especially in a series like this.
Yeah, it was really interesting in game 2 to see Ja so successful, relentlessly entering the paint, whether he's falling back on his floater, dunking on someone, getting to the free throw line. It looked more in the Minnesota series like he was sometimes forcing the issue on drives. And there were moments where I actually would have been fine with just sort of settling for a jumper, pulling up from three, or kicking it out to one of his shooters. Last night, it was like a Giannis or LeBron shot chart for a guy who I think is listed at 175 pounds on ESPN. He was not deterred by any of Golden State's rim protectors because they don't really have any that they choose to play. James Wiseman, I think, is still in the NBA, but they're playing a lot of Wiggins at center, Draymond at center, Otto Porter in the front court. And they've actually been doing fairly well on the boards, but the Grizzlies are not afraid of who they're going to meet at the rim. I'm actually surprised that Ja only has 16 free throw attempts through 2 games. He's made 14. I wonder if the Warriors are going to keep playing the math, like you said, let the offense operate as their best defense, and continue to trust these smaller lineups. They don't want Looney moving on their back line, trying to keep up with some of the speed and athleticism in Memphis's backcourt.
Well, having said what I said about their offense being their best defense, I also think they just have to make Ja a little bit more uncomfortable on defense. They're giving him such a cushion, which makes sense because you want him to be more of a jump shooter. But I mean, there was a play at the end of the half yesterday where he rolled the ball up the court and picked it up at their 3-point line without anyone putting any remote pressure on him to pick up the ball before then. I think it ended up with a miss, and the Warriors ended up getting a shot off before the half. But still, you can't let a guy with 6 seconds on the clock roll the ball all the way into basically shooting range without picking him up. And he just looked like, I mean, it was a great performance, and he looked like he was playing under such control the whole time, and they were kind of allowing him to play at whatever pace he wanted to play at. He would get into the paint, survey the defense, figure out what his best option was, throw a series of moves at whoever was guarding him. So I think doubling might be a good way to just try to speed him up a little bit. Once he starts to get into a rhythm and the defense gets on its heels, he's getting into that paint every time.
The Grizzlies just seem like they very clearly have the advantage in this series in terms of live bodies, sort of young legs, guys that are comfortable putting pressure on the ball. They got great minutes from Zaire Williams last night. They have guys like Tyus Jones and D'Anthony Melton who are just more than happy to force Steph to work a little bit to get past the half court line. D'Anthony Melton's had a couple blocks coming from the help side where I have to Google again how tall he is and what wingspan he had at the combine. And at the same time, it took absolutely every ounce of Ja greatness for them to pull out last night's game, which obviously the Warriors go up 2-0 in Memphis, and we're probably saying it's wraps.
Yeah, first of all, you can never underestimate the atmosphere of the game 2 home crowd where they've dropped game 1 and just kind of the desperation in that environment. Memphis came out and was extremely fired up early on. And I think they actually had a chance to build up a really big lead early on. And we're sort of figuratively punching the Warriors in the mouth. But then when Dillon Brooks literally smacked Gary Payton in the head, I think that actually really kind of hurt them a little bit because it took a lot of the momentum out. They got out to an 8-0 run. It was the 3rd game in a row where the home team came out and just played with a sense of energy and desperation that kind of just got the other team back on their heels, and they would get out to, 8-0,
Right.
8-0, 12-2, 15-3 type leads. And Memphis seemed like they were kind of on their way to that. And then they had the whole flagrant 2 debacle. But on the athleticism point, through these 2 games so far, even with Memphis looking like the more athletic team, the Warriors are winning the points in the paint battle by 30, 116-86. That's a total over the 2 games. Also in offensive rebounding, both games, same exact rebounding margin, 52-47. And the Warriors have 2 more offensive boards than the Grizzlies through 2 games, which, considering how these teams played in the regular season, is huge. And probably Steven Adams' absence has a lot to do with that. But the Warriors have really been hustling well to loose balls. I thought Otto Porter did a great job yesterday fighting for offensive rebounds. But if that holds up, I think it's going to be very difficult for Memphis to replicate what they had yesterday, particularly if the Warriors shooting regresses somewhat to the standard they've set.
On the Porter point, he's put a lot of effort into rebounding. It feels like the balls he isn't securing, he's tipping to a teammate. He's active. He's always sort of in the mosh pit. I totally agree with you on the Brooks flagrant 2 sort of free timeout for the Warriors when Kerr needed things to slow down. I know Memphis was rocking, but they got out to such a strong start, and suddenly the Warriors had a few minutes to convene. Veteran leadership takes over, and it was just a dogfight from there on out. So no Dylan Brooks means a little bit more Zaire Williams. On the flip side, no Gary Payton Jr. meant a little more Kuminga. On the Warriors front, they're still waiting for a Clay game. He had 3 really strong shooting nights to close the Nuggets series. He's been about 5 for 20 in the first 2 games of this round 2. Clay is Clay. I just refuse to believe that he's going to have a dud of a series. And this seems to be going 6 or 7.
Yeah. And it's kind of been the story since he came back that it's either like a 2 for 12 3-point shooting night or an 8 for 12 3-point shooting night. It seems like he either kind of has it or doesn't. And it sort of evens out to a similar percentage to what he shot for his career. But it seems like he's in his trying to get his rhythm back is a little more streaky than he's been before. But yeah, I may or may not have texted before the game last night that I felt the Clay vintage coming on, and it was not, in fact, a Clay vintage last night.
And on the flip side, we got Desmond Bane, the other team's sharpshooting wing, 5 for 17 in 2 games.
Yeah.
Super quiet.
There must be something wrong with him. I mean, they've talked about this sort of back tightness, back injury that he might have. The last thing I'll say on the Warriors also is they have to get their turnovers under control. 18 turnovers in each of the first 2 games. If that's closer to, especially with a team as athletic and fast as Memphis, if that's closer to 13 or 12, they're probably winning those games comfortably. So that's always something that's kind of come with their fast, free-flowing system where they'll throw the ball all over the place, but you have to cut out some of the dumb ones. Steph had some really sloppy ones yesterday trying to throw passes over the top, and maybe he's just adjusting to Memphis's athleticism and length, but they're going to have to clean that up.
Draymond and Steph, 2 of the absolute basketball geniuses we've ever had, are still prone to 1 or 2 real head scratchers a night. So we've had 2 flagrant 2s in 2 games, which got us thinking, what's your all flagrant 2 team? I was picking from guys that are still in the playoffs. You told me you drew from the overall pool of players.
Yes. Now, 4 of those 5 players are still in the playoffs, and the 5th made the playoffs. So maybe there's a little correlation between having a flagrant 2 guy on your team and being successful. I mean, we have to grandfather in the 2 flagrant 2 recipients thus far of Draymond and Dylan Brooks, probably the, Vegas's leaders for getting suspended for flagrant points at some point during a playoff series or a playoffs. So I've got 2 there. Why don't you give me one of your next ones?
Yeah, so Brooks, Draymond goes without saying. The next guy on my list is Bobby Portis.
Not on my list.
Was it Lauri Markkanen that he got into it with?
Mirotic.
Oh, Mirotic, wrong European. Yeah, he pretty much sent Mirotic back to Barcelona. Mirotic was like, I'm down to take $3 million a year in Barca. I don't need NBA money. This is too much. So Portis, I feel like he has sharp elbows like Brooks and Draymond, but to a lesser extent, he's an emotional player. It benefits him. It has hurt him in the past.
Yep.
Then I got Grayson.
Oh, how could I forget Grayson? He should definitely be on the team.
It's only right that Grayson makes an appearance on this list.
Yeah.
His feet end up in illegal places. I think that he is actually sort of the highest ceiling guy on this flagrant 2 team. A Grayson Allen flagrant 2 is going to be a no-brainer. I think oh my God, he lost his shit. And
I think he just blacks out sometimes. Like I remember that video of him just losing it on the bench after like his 3rd tripping thing at Duke or whatever, where he's just like, he looks like he's, I don't know, just come back from being a werewolf or something. And he's like, oh my God, what have I done?
Severance NBA edition.
Yes.
And then the 5th guy I wonder if he's on your list, the engine of the Boston Celtics, Marcus Smart.
He was on my list, yeah.
Okay. All
And
right.
I think he is most likely to draw a flagrant 2 by attempting 5 seconds late to commit a charge on somebody who's airborne. Like I'm just picturing someone trying to dunk from the free throw line and Marcus Smart just stepping in while they're midair and trying to take their legs out. But yeah, he's one. The other ones I had on my list, one of them's gonna have to go to six man, I guess. But a good six man for this team, I think, if you just need a few minutes for someone to go get a flagrant 2, is Udonis Haslam.
Love it. He doesn't need his name called. And if you could get a flagrant 2 for inflicting pain on your own teammate or coach,
I was going to say the
think
same
he's
thing.
in the mix.
And my final entry for just, I think the most likely to do the Andrew Bynum, JJ Barea, like forearm shiver when the game is out of hand, is Hassan Whiteside.
Yep, no doubt. He was on the Blazers. I've watched a lot of Whiteside in my day. The man just has no conception of his physical power. He could be trying to hug an opponent and bodies will fly. His hands will be up in the air. He might even be laughing. You laugh at Scott Foster, and that's a one-way ticket to flagrant 2. Speaking of emotions taking over on the court, everyone loves to talk about how Embiid broke down in tears immediately post Toronto Kawhi shot. It got me thinking about our conversation about KD last week. I regret not talking about KD mentally. I really focused on the physical. The Celtics came out swinging, and by swinging, I mean switching, mauling, leveraging their athletic superiority. And KD kind of looked around at his less talented, diminutive supporting cast and said, no mas. He checked out. He calls himself a god on Twitter, and he is one. But gods aren't supposed to check out of playoff series, especially the most grating ones, which leads us from the Durantula to Spida, Donovan Mitchell. He was lost on defense, but Donovan Mitchell, I don't think he checked out on Utah, but it was a rough shooting series and he was an absolute liability on the other end. About 18 months ago, November 2020, the Jazz signed him to a 5-year, $163 million rookie max, as, by the way, all 29 other teams would have done with his bird rights. 28 million this year. That'll be 30 next year, then 33, then 35, then 37. And he's an unrestricted free agent in 2026 when he's 30 years old. Bill Simmons just called Mitchell CJ McCollum with better PR. Great radio banter, but I'm not having it. 21-year-old CJ wasn't carrying an offense in the first round of the playoffs, logging 29, 7, and 3 on 46, 36, 92 splits, planting a seed for the Russ PG divorce. A seed watered, nurtured, not by CJ, but by CJ's teammate, Damian Lillard.
Beautifully harvested as well.
Beautifully harvested. So yes, he was terrible against the Mavs this year. Last year's Jazz collapse against the Clips, that was not a Mitchell collapse. He averaged 35, made 36 of his 83s in a 6-game second round series. In 2020, he was transcendent in the bubble, like must-watch television, losing to the Nuggets team that sent Kawhi packing. 18 and 19, his team fell to Harden's Rockets, as a lot of teams did in the West. This is all to say that I'm buying Donovan Mitchell stock right now. Of all the defensive liability star guards, I'm willing to bet that the right coach can get something out of his 6'10", jacked frame. This isn't Trae Young's body we're working with. We were talking about Otto Porter and how he's been a little bit reborn on this Warriors team. We've seen time and time again how cultures can reinvigorate these players. Otto Porter, Reggie Bullock, we'd kind of written him off as like a Nick journeyman three-point shooter for hire. Now he's more valuable to the Mavericks than Kristaps Porzingis was. Larry Nance looked like a nobody on the Blazers, and suddenly he's a big part of a really inspiring Pelicans season. So young coaches have re-energized a lot of these guys in new roles. I don't know what the future is for Quinn Snyder in Utah. Lots been swirling. My point is, you're paying Donovan Mitchell basically for like 26, 27, 28, 29 here, age. Yeah. I think that those numbers aren't going to look so bad. To even suggest that this is approaching bad contract, I think is overkill, very unfair, given all the moments he's already had in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm probably someone who's been a little lower on Mitchell than consensus. And I think this year's playoff failure rests much more on him than it does on Gobert, as some of their previous ones have. I mean, it's been well documented, but every Mavs or Brunson and Dinwiddie were just trying to get switched onto Mitchell and would just go right around him, which for a guy who came out of school as a defensive stopper is definitely not where you want to be. But yeah, I mean, I would never say that he's on a bad contract or anything like that. But coming into this year, I had him pretty similar to Ja in my preseason rankings, which speaks to how much of a leap Ja has taken this year. I personally don't think it's crazy that he won Most Improved Player, because going from fringe all-star to clear top 10 player takes a lot of work. And I think he should be rewarded for that. But I had Mitchell at 20 coming into the year, 20th best player. I had Ja at 28. Now, if I redid that today, Mitchell would probably be around the same spot. He might have even fallen a couple rungs, and Ja would be in the top 10. So, I mean, part of that just goes to show how lucky you have to be with team building, because first of all, you have to be lucky to pick a guy like of Mitchell's caliber in the late lottery and have him hit. And then you have to also, if you really want to contend, be lucky enough to have that guy be able to take himself from, a top 30 player to a top 10 player. And that can be the hardest rung to climb as an NBA player. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point, he's kind of been the same player for a few years, which I think is why people are frustrated.
Yeah, he was an early bloomer.
Yeah, he was an early bloomer, and he was a little older coming out of college as well. So that's not necessarily super surprising, right? Because I think he came out after like his sophomore or junior season. I would say he's not a 1 on a championship team. He's probably a 2. And I think the NBA right now has a very deep class of people who are capable 2s on a championship team. If your 1 is good enough, I mean, that extends from people like Chris Middleton all the way up to, trying to pull up my top 50 players list going into the season now.
And while you do that, we still haven't seen Donovan Mitchell share a backcourt with a high-level facilitator. You got like one regular season of semi-prime Conley. Conley has wilted. He got a brief waltz with Ricky Rubio. He had a little bit of Joe Ingles stirring the drink, with a little bit of the facilitation duties off his shoulders. What would Donovan Mitchell look like playing alongside sort of one of these non-all-star or fringe all-star lead guards, guys like Brogdon, Van Vliet, Halliburton, DeJounte Murray? Lonzo was a name as I was looking kind of through the list of guys. Maybe a long one who can make up for some of his deficiencies on defense while better involving the guys around the backcourt.
I mean, he played with Conley the past couple of years where Conley was a fringe all-star, and he wasn't that this year. I think he probably fell off a little bit, although in the regular season he was pretty good. It's more in the playoffs that he's fallen off, but I don't think that player would look dramatically different. I mean, if he's going to be on a championship team, he's going to need to have, I think he's probably best suited as a second option on offense, and he'd be a very good and overqualified second option, overqualified to be a good team, not overqualified to win a championship. I mean, if you put him in the Jamal Murray role in Denver and he's sort of had his brain wired to play with Jokic, he would probably be incredible there. And I think that would be an upgrade for the Nuggets.
I actually think that that's a disrespect to the Murray Jokic synergy. Yeah. They have something special. I've seen what winning cultures have done for stars that we had previously thought of as subpar defenders.
Yeah.
Devin Booker is so much more active on that end than he was just a couple of years ago. I think it was ridiculous for people to compare Davion Mitchell coming out of Baylor to Donovan, but I think that there was some residual consideration of the guy. It's easy to forget that Donovan Mitchell was a similar prospect coming out of college to Davion Mitchell. The idea was he's going to make it hell for opposing dribblers, and he's athletic enough that hopefully some offense comes, and he's a good enough shooter. And here we are. The Mavericks are absolutely hunting him. His offense is what has made him indispensable.
Yeah, and I think really the frustration from some fans just comes from like the stagnation, as I said before, because
Yeah.
he's kind of been the same player for a few years, and he may have just reached his ceiling and peaked early. And like coming into the year, I didn't just have him close to Ja. I had him kind of in a similar group with Devin Booker and Tatum. Those guys have continued to climb. Tatum's certainly a top 10 player. Booker is probably a top 10 player. I haven't gone through and done the list. He might be in sort of the top 10, top 15 players. Both those guys are continuing to climb, and Booker's improved on defense, and he's done all these different things. And as a Knicks fan, I get excited when I see the sort of Mitchell to the Knicks stories, but then I start thinking hard about whether I'd want to include RJ in a Donovan Mitchell package, and it kind of gives me the shivers.
I agree with you there, but I think I'm way above consensus on RJ. I think that we are now a couple of years removed from Donovan Mitchell's best work, and that's part of the problem. I think we underrate Ingles' absence on a team that needed more point guard in its DNA. He did a lot of small things to make that machine work.
Even with Ingles, though, I don't know if they were beating any of the top 4 seeds in the West this year.
Yeah.
And honestly, I can't wait till we do our pod on the West next year, because that's just going to be crazy once some of these teams reload and get healthy.
Yeah. All I'm saying is if I were the Knicks, I guess I wouldn't give up RJ for Donovan, but I would be looking hard at him if I were another team kind of interested in poaching a star. You're not paying him past $33 million for all the things he can do for your offense in a couple of years will look really good as the cap continues to rise. Bucks Celtics. One thought to start this off. Giannis should never take a wide open three. It means that he has a runway for a gigantic Euro step layup. One of the craziest things that's been apparent in these first couple games of Bucks Celtics is the Celtics don't look huge anymore. The Bucks are big dudes. Talk to me about what you've seen so far.
Well, game 2, I think the Bucks lost that game in the first 4 minutes. I talked about it a little bit when I was touching on the Warriors series, but this was one of those games where they're up 1-0 on the road. They didn't come out with the requisite intensity. Boston was absolutely desperate. The crowd was going crazy. They hit the shots they needed at the start of the game, and suddenly, bang, they're down like 14-3 or something along those lines. They were just kind of crawling out of a hole all the way after that. And I think it mostly came from their offense. Their defense, I thought, was good at the beginning of the game. I thought Boston was hitting tough shots. They were yielding the right sorts of shots, Milwaukee was. But then on offense, it was all these possessions where they'd come down and it would either be one pass shot or no pass shot, which is just, it shouldn't be their game right now. But Boston also did an incredible job defending yesterday. You talked about their size a little bit. Grant Williams was incredible. Probably some of the best one-on-one defense I've seen against Giannis in the past few years. The first half of Giannis looked a lot like Giannis in that bubble series against the Heat, where he was just kind of trying to plow his way through the proverbial wall with very limited success and missing a lot of shots, picking up offensive fouls. So, yeah, I mean, the Bucks looked really good in game 1. They did not come out with the requisite intensity in game 2. I think this series just seems like it's going to go back and forth. I would probably bet on a split in games 3 and 4 in Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee really needs to win game 3 because there's going to be so much pressure on them to win game 4 if they drop game 3. Both teams, there's going to be a huge amount of pressure on them to win game 4 if they drop game 3. So, yeah, I mean, it seems like it's going to continue to just be a rock fight. Great series.
Giannis went full LeBronis in game 2, second half. Like I said, the Celtics at times have looked like a finesse team. They're taking almost twice as many threes in games 1 and 2. 93 for the Celtics, 52 for the Bucks. Pat Connaughton caught fire in the second half yesterday too. He looked confident getting into the paint. He had a really nice 2-man game going with Giannis.
I'd like to see some more of him going forward. I think just offensively, he looks much more effective than Wes Matthews. Defensively, I know Matthews is doing a very solid job on Tatum, so I don't think I'd necessarily change up the starting unit, but more minutes for Connaughton, I think. And yeah, you touched on the Giannis second half. I wanted to make a little comparison because I remember in the finals last year, game 1, Giannis, he had like 20 and 17, I think. He was coming off his hyperextension. He was kind of feeling the Suns out. Suns won that game fairly comfortably. Game 2, the Suns, I think, also shot the ball really well, got out to a big lead. And in the second half and the first half, Giannis didn't do much. He ended up with 40 in the game. He had 20 in the third quarter, probably something like 30 in the second half. And he seemed like he kind of started to figure out some things about their defense and that kind of played out over the rest of the series, where he probably averaged about 40 a game for the rest of the series. I don't know if that's what happened yesterday, but he had 18 in the third quarter. He definitely looked a lot more comfortable in the second half and like he was getting better looks at the basket. So I'll be curious to see if that plays out in a similar way over the course of this series, where he kind of starts to figure out some of the things that Boston's throwing at him and figure out how to step around guys effectively and still get good looks off. Because that first half was one of the worst offensive first halves I've seen him have in quite some time. And credit to the Celtics defense too, because he wasn't just playing badly. They were baiting him into bad shots. And then when he was going for good ones, they were taking it away pretty effectively.
You texted me at some point in the first half. There's no way that Grant Williams is the Giannis stopper that hasn't seemed to exist until tonight. You know, Giannis is 11 of 20 from the line. I think that there's something to be said for everyone using their 6 fouls against him. The Celtics haven't had any sort of front court crisis, you know, like Jaren in Memphis. Use your fouls, slow down their offense, kill the rhythm, get him to the line. He isn't shooting free throws like he did in the finals. The pace of this series, these games are moving much more slowly than Memphis, Golden State. The offensive rebound rates are about half. Both teams are getting back in a defensive stance and grinding out possessions. Jason Tatum has not yet found his rhythm. He gets a lot of Drew. Sometimes he'll get some Connaughton. The Bucks definitely don't want Grayson on him, but it feels like they've been able to throw enough bodies, whether it's, you know, Portis's long arms for one possession here. Jason Tatum hasn't found his comfort zone.
So, you know, if you want to go back again and do the, hey, we won even though, or hey, we lost even though, yeah, Tatum still hasn't gotten going. Giannis still hasn't really gotten going in sort of a, you know, 12 of 18 shooting sort of way. Both fan bases, I think, can hold out some hope that will happen. Although honestly, the level of defense in the series is so high that you might not get a high efficiency, high scoring game. Like that just might not be possible against these defenses. It's going to have to take a lot of cracks at it to be able to get to that 35 point mark, unless you're Jaylen Brown yesterday, just absolutely lighting the net on fire. And then, you know, just the shooting, 20 of 43 from 3 for the Celtics, 3 of 18, I think, for the Bucks. It's going to be really hard to win a game like that. So the Bucks are going to have to shoot better. Hopefully their role players for them will shoot better at home than they did on the road. Yeah, no, I mean, game 2 was certainly concerning for the Bucks, but at the same time, as I said before, you can't underestimate the desperation of a home team down 1-0 and just the fire and intensity they're going to come out with. And I would expect the Bucks to come out with similar intensity in game 3.
Just viscerally, it feels like the Bucks have something more sustainable going. Like you said, you got Jaylen Brown dropping 20 in the first half yesterday. He couldn't miss. The second half was a much different story for him. And then Giannis will just start bulldozing guys and getting into the paint. He's not scared to miss his free throws. He's going at the rim every single time he gets the ball. It feels like the Bucks have been less reliant on hot streaks. And I would just be really worried if I were Boston, the way that the Bucks kind of just hung in there yesterday. It wasn't their night. The Celtics made enough threes, but there's an ease to their process right now. They're taking a lot of high percentage twos. Giannis is clearly the best player in the series. And in order for the Celtics to win this series, Tatum doesn't have to be the best player in the series, but he's got to be a superstar. And so far, it's been the Giannis show. And a real reminder, we were talking last week about Steph versus Tatum. Some of the stuff we've seen so far this week is just sort of a slap in the face. Like, yes, of course, that playoff experience is invaluable. I want Steph in the playoffs. Tatum has a lot to prove, and Tatum is an unbelievable two-way guy. I trust that he's going to shoot more efficiently from 2 because he's making his threes. He just can't finish at the rim in this series like he could in round 1.
One last thing on the Bucks. I think do you think some of their offensive process, they should try to get their bigs the ball a little closer to the basket to start off? Lopez had just a nightmare game in game 2, like foul trouble, wasn't making any shots. So they're going to need him to be a little bit more productive. In the minutes where Giannis is off the floor, I feel like Lopez should always be on the floor, or, when all else fails on a possession, dump it to him and see if he can just kind of overwhelm people physically, because he's still just such a big dude.
Yeah.
He should be able to get shots off down there.
And you'd think they have a real advantage there too. The Celtics, especially without Smart, but even with him, are a little bit ball handling deficient, a little bit entry pass deficient. This feels like a series that the Bucks very much want to take into the paint. And Drew has been the point guard of this series. He dictates pace. He's picking guys up full court. Drew has been the best guard in 2 games.
Yeah. So it sounds like you think the Bucks are going to win this series.
If I were a Bucks fan, I'd feel really good about how they've looked without Middleton. At least going into game 3, you'll sleep well knowing that you have the best player in the series and Drew Holiday playing at a really high level, the all defense team level. They're less reliant on threes. They've been stronger on the boards, and they've been comfortable playing multiple bigs. When they play Portis and Giannis together, it just feels like they have a lot of ways to score inside. Over time, that is beating the Celtics' long-range attempts.
All right. Yeah, well, you're probably less emotionally invested in the series than I am, because I, really like Giannis and don't really like the Celtics very much as a Knicks fan. So, from your lips to my ears, let's hope it's true.
This has been episode 2 of the PodSham Pod. See you next week.